Perpetual Hunger by Michael Carolyn. Winner, the 2011 Crossroads Irish American Writing Prize, San Francisco, California. Read by the author. I am perpetually hungry. Between meals, my energy slumps and my stomach churns. Within seconds, the pang is a gut-wrenching emptiness. It's as though my insides are folding. I lose perspective, blame objects, people, the weather. My father suffers the same affliction. He taught me to have crackers and peanut butter on hand. I grew up well fed, so much so that after dinner, my father gave leftovers to the family dog, admonishing my siblings and I with, I can still hear him every time we arrive at the garbage can with half-eaten hot dogs, stray corn, potato chip crumbs. Don't throw that away, he said. The dog will eat it. Today, I cringe at half-eaten plates of spaghetti left by my son, oatmeal that doesn't make it into my daughter's breakfast bowl. Don't waste that, I say. Finish your plate. We have so much that we give it away to our chickens. They're better fed than I am. Now and again, I snatch the last piece of good bread from the shiny aluminum compost bin before it goes out to the coop, or a piece of still ripe fruit. I don't know why. Lately, I've come to believe my perpetual hunger and utilization of every morsel of food is passed down by my Irish ancestors. There are other things Irish about me. My surname, for instance, it's a brand of tasty Irish cream liqueur. And O'Carolyn, well, he was a 17th century harper whose compositions are beloved to this day. But I don't drink anymore, and I am no musician. What makes me Irish is the stomach and its daily growl. It is the physical inheritance, the connection to the processing of life, the sustaining of blood, bone, and sinew, what I am left with every waking day of my life. My great-great-grandfather, after all, was among the famine Irish. I'm 5 generations removed. Irish is a small slice of my ethnic pie. The grandfather's son married an off-the-boat German. Their son married a woman of Scotch, Irish, British, Prussian descent. Their son married a Welsh, German, Swiss, Native American mix. Their son, me, married Irish with a sprinkle of Lithuanian and a smidge of Brit. My ancestors lived lives of impulse and happenstance rather than planned pedigree design. The point is that being Irish in America today is at once as random as the color of the shirt you picked out this morning and as meaningful as these mid-afternoon empty stomach pangs that I contend with daily. And my ancestor who struggled with this hunger the most happens to be Irish, born in Drumbaragh, Townland, Kells Parish, County Meath in 1844, the year before the potato crop failed. It took me 20 years to find this birthplace, a feat much heralded by fellow genealogists wanting to claim their Irishness. How'd you find that? They ask. We've been searching for years. I tell them it was mostly luck, but I say it was also longing, a hunger satiated briefly by each single moment I directed my attention toward the uncovering, the unearthing, and finally the rising up. For that's what actually happened. To seek is to have those sought rise up and greet you. It was a quest that explained my bottomless pit of a stomach. When I was 25 years old, I visited my great-aunt in Florida to inquire about her brother, my paternal grandfather, who died when I was 3 years old. Though we rarely visited in person, my Aunt Anne had faithfully remembered my birthday with a yearly card. She was 90 and lived along an island along the Gulf Coast. She had a tuna fish sandwich waiting for me when I arrived, knowing perhaps the men in our family's empty stomach syndrome. My grandfather and her had the Irish in them, she says, like their father, whose parents were born in Ireland. Her other brother was much more German serious, like their mother, and so I asked her what that meant, Irish. She told me that it was a way of wearing the world loosely, especially in the bad times, of having a good time, of exercising one's sense of humor, whatever it may be. The Irish was her grandfather, my namesake, who came here during the famine, that much she knew. I asked if she remembered him. No, but her brother did, and there were 2 images from his youth. His grandfather's house moving slowly down a narrow Philadelphia street, pulled by horses tethered to ropes, and the man's belly sticking out of the top of the coffin at his funeral. My aunt showed me the only photograph of him, an oval portrait made by a professional photography studio in the early 1900s. He doesn't look ill-fed. He is thick-necked and large-boned, wearing a broad black sack coat. His left eye is in shadow, glistening slightly as though its pupil is screwed up toward the ceiling. His beard is bushy and hides his mouth, making him look more Russian than Irish. Tolstoy comes to mind. Burly and wide with a furrowed brow, his face resembles an old-time blacksmith turned horseshoer in turn-of-the-century Philadelphia, which is what he was. Shortly following my visit to my aunt's, I found the ship manifest recording his arrival in New York as a 3-year-old with his mother, father, and sisters. After more digging, more records rose to me. The census, a death certificate, his marriage to an Irish-born girl. They recorded his place of birth as merely Ireland, and so a silence about this place ensued for the next several decades. Ireland. That is all he wanted anyone to know. I began noticing it obliquely in the records, though. The places he lived, Upper Dublin, the names of his neighbors, McCormick, Plunkett, the names of his children, Anna and Catherine, and their baptismal sponsors, Hogan, Coleman, O'Neill. I visited old Philadelphia churches with names like Holy Cross and Immaculate Conception. I photographed narrow-fronted row houses now occupied by new immigrant Puerto Ricans and Koreans. I searched for the dead through cemetery groundskeepers. I cold-called the living whom I found in telephone books or on the next of kin boxes on burial forms. Nearly every paper trace of him in this country rose to greet me when I sought it. The pound of potatoes, Irish, produced in one year, 1859, by the Pennsylvania farm upon which his family first settled. 2,500. The number of employees at his blacksmith shop. 4. $1.60 paid per day to a skilled mechanic and $1.25 to ordinary laborers. His membership in the Montgomery County Society for the Recovery of Stolen Horses and Bringing Thieves to Justice. The number of children delivered by his wife by the year 1900, 18. The number of children still living in the year 1900, 6. The hour at which the carriages met the trolley to bring mourners to his funeral at St. Veronica's in 1906, 8 o'clock. What strikes me today is the amount of detail that an unremarkable American life that simply awaited my arrival. Time passed. One night, last winter, I happened upon an internet site that advertised church parish records in Ireland. For a small fee, I plugged in his name, the names of his parents, and the year I suspected that he was born. Suddenly, my screen showed a likely match. My heart pounded. I clicked the link. I glanced quickly at the parents' names and the date. The parish record of my great-great-grandfather's birth in Kells. For a moment, I thought someone must have made it up and put them on the internet just for me. Then it struck me as I sat there. The surname even spelled correctly. The maiden name matching the one I had long known. The dates almost exact with the death record found across the Atlantic. This was the one shining on my screen, newly transcribed from a musty stone church basement 3,000 miles away to a fleeting internet page. Kells is a parish an hour northwest of Dublin by automobile and noted for its ancient monastery and illuminated manuscript, the Book of Kells. Its population dropped a third during the famine. Land records there show my great-great-grandfather was born on a plot of land smaller than my front yard today, 2,722 and a half square feet to be exact, otherwise known as 10 perches, an Old English measurement. It was likely a mud cabin with a pig and a fireplace. His grandfather, Michael, is listed as the tenant and paid $4.75 in rent in today's currency for the garden and $42.79 for the house for one calendar year. A ticket on a sailing ship to America costs the equivalent of $350 today. Father Nicholas McVoy, the priest who baptized my great-great-grandfather, wrote to the governor of Ireland the year before they immigrated, pleading for the saving from death by starvation upwards of 400 entire families, of which my family was very likely one. In the letter, he complains that one prominent landlord, the Marquess of Headfort, whose property lies next to the estate where I find my family, donated only £10, exclamations included, toward the relief of his renters. Human life will, I feel painfully convinced, be immediately and extensively sacrificed, the parish priest McVoy wrote. And as history shows us, it was. Thomas, age 40, wife Elizabeth, age 30, walked their 3 children for 40 miles to Dublin, with belongings on their backs or in a cart. And they brought the neighborhood with them. Just before my family's name on the ship manifest were the Rileys, the Sheridans, and the Farrells, names I found in the land records, living on the same large estate. In Dublin, a ticket agent tells them that across the sea, a common laboring man received high wages, sat at the same table, and ate with his master, where everyone was on perfect equality in America. History tells us everyone but the Irish, African Americans, Asians, Mexicans, and others were on perfect equality. And so my family took a leap of faith like all of the other ethnicities who arrive at our shores or on our borders these days. In Dublin, they got their first taste of the Atlantic by crossing the dreadfully rough Channel for Liverpool, where they arrive ripe for plucking at the hands of an assortment of unscrupulous runners, lodging housekeepers, ticket brokers, and other crooks. And they weren't even in New York yet. They found passage on the American-built 3-masted sailing ship, the Patrick Henry. With 2 decks, it was 159 feet long, or about half the length of a football field, enough room for the hundreds of passengers and a full hold of cases, casks, crates of iron and tin. Accommodations were notoriously lousy. My family traveled in the retrofitted cargo hold, but the ship was one of the fastest and most dependable during the great age of sail. Its captain, Joseph Clement Delano, was the great-uncle of the future President of the United States. With mutton-chop whiskers, a closely cropped beard and mustache, and a Panama-type hat, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Uncle Joe sailed my great-great-grandfather's family 3,000 miles for a month. And we've been Democrats ever since. Of course, we now know that the 34-day voyage from June 23rd to July 27th was likely terrifying, lice-ridden, and cold. One regulator quipped that the Irish were, quote, less than a box of goods and handled with less care as they did not break, nor, if injured, require to be paid for. The New York newspapers announced its arrival and printed the names of the 18 cabin passengers: Mr. Ashton, Master Ward, Miss Hay. They also printed the name of my family, 300 in steerage. Yet my 3-year-old great-great-grandfather and his 2 sisters, Annie, age 1, and Catherine, age 4, survive. 3 years later, their father is working as a Pennsylvania farm laborer, and life is likely a little less wretched than it was in Ireland. There are 2 horses, 3 cows, according to the 1850 census, and to celebrate more children. Sex being one of the few outlets from their wretchedness, writes Tim Pat Coogan. The Catholic peasantry produced children in such numbers that not even the virulent fevers of the time could prevent a population explosion. 5 more children were born to the couple in the next decade, but the next generation suffers. Michael's family moves from farm to city in the late 19th century and loses 12 children within 7 years to fever and stillbirth. In April 1992, when I visited my aunt, she also told me about her own father, my great-grandfather, Matthew William, the first generation born in America in 1871. He evidently couldn't get my aunt down to the Catholic Church to be baptized fast enough. His German wife wheeled down my aunt to the Lutheran Church, which is why my family is today Protestant. Rejecting his religion, she ejected him as well in the mid-teens, but never divorced. The reasons were complex, stemming from what I now gather was a combination of German rigidity, Irish alcoholism, gambling, general tomfoolery. My aunt moved schools 8 times in her childhood, she tells me. I recall him coming home from a faraway place, she says, and he had been drinking, and I pleaded with him to stop. She shows me another photograph, this time of her father, as tall as his father Michael was wide. He is stoop-shouldered, with a high forehead, deep-set, sad eyes, and an unmistakable grin. In one photograph, he is dressed in a loose-fitting overcoat and poses with his father-in-law, a much shorter, sharp-jawed German man with a pipe in his hand. Toward the end of his life, Matthew William died at age 71 in 1942. He worked as a night watchman at a large factory in Philadelphia. He was what the writer Peter Quinn calls in the essay collection Irish Hunger, a vagabond proletariat who went wherever there were jobs that required little more than muscle and a shovel, who wandered off, or their children did, their descendants rapidly losing any conscious sense of an Irish past or identity. In fact, no one told my father, William George, that he even had a grandfather until a relative said that the nice old man living down the street who died was indeed my father's real grandfather. To be an old man down the street, unable to be a grandfather to your grandchildren, seems to me a sad, unspoken thing, and sad, unspoken things are passed down to the children. Shortly after my visit with my great-aunt, her brother with the German disposition, my great-uncle Matthew George called me to say he was coming east from Arizona and would I drive him to his old neighborhoods in Philadelphia. I drove up from Washington, D.C., and I took him to the house in which he, my aunt, and grandfather were born. I'd been drinking a lot then, and word had reached him about this, probably through my mother. I was in my early 20s and recently exiled from the place of my own birth, Kansas City, to the East Coast, where I had begun my career. And I remember that he told me that the drinking would ruin me if I didn't watch it, that I should quit altogether. He said that his father drank, that he drank too much, and that he himself decided not to drink, and that I might want to decide that as well. I did a few years later, but that day we drove for a while in silence, and then we came to the house in which he was born. He was delivered by the same doctor who attended his dying grandfather, Michael, that 3-year-old famine survivor, in the last 6 days of his life in 1906. I asked him whether his father, Matthew William, had truly carved his mother's name in the woodwork of an upstairs window. His sister Ann had just told me the story in Florida. I don't know about that, he said, and he looked sadly onto the 2-story row house on Wyoming Avenue in northeastern Philadelphia. A couple of African-American kids, maybe 12-year-olds, bounced by with a basketball. Next door was an identical brick row house that had been condemned, crisscrossed with plywood that had been spray-painted with graffiti. Look what they've done to the neighborhood, he said. I thought he choked up and cried a tear, but I couldn't tell. What? I asked. What did they do? They've ruined it, these damn people. He was referring to the Puerto Ricans, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, the Central Americans, African Americans, all the new immigrants who had moved into the inner city neighborhood that the old Irish and German immigrants had once had the run of, and which used to be, when he was a little boy, the outer edge of the city. I didn't have the information I have now to tell him that he'd had a good run, that his people came from very little, seasick and with no money, and hardly a scrap to eat, and lucky to be alive at all, and that he and my grandfather and my great-aunt had risen up, received educations, married, prospered, had children, grandchildren, and so-called assimilated into American society, and that now it was the other damned people's turn. I do not think he would have understood. He died the following year. What he did understand that day, sitting in my tan Subaru sedan near his birthplace, was that it was late in the afternoon and that he was hungry. He grinned the handsome grin of his father and asked whether there was anything to eat in the automobile. I realized that I too was famished, but I didn't have any peanut butter and crackers. I took him instead to the safe and the familiar, an American fast food restaurant.